Now, Ukraine's military says it has used US-supplied advanced weapons systems to strike more than 50 Russian military targets in recent weeks. And it credits the multiple rocket-launching trucks known as HIMARS with helping destroy ammunition depots and bridges in Russian-held territory. Ukraine reportedly now has 8 HIMARS and more are on the way. But the vehicles have also become a new target for Russian attacks.
This is HIMARS, a high-mobility artillery rocket system, the crown jewel in Ukraine's growing arsenal of US-made weapons. And this is what it can do. The HIMARS can pull up in the middle of a road and fire off multiple rockets very quickly. And they're precision-guided, so they can accurately target Russian munitions, combat centres and more. The HIMARS is basically a truck carrying a pod containing 6 missiles. It can be reloaded in 3 to 5 minutes. Most artillery is mounted on slower-moving treaded vehicles or towed by trucks, but a HIMARS can get away quickly once it's fired off its payload. Or, as the military term goes, it can shoot and scoot. Its missiles have a range of 80 kilometers, far more than most Russian artillery. This means the Russians must move their sensitive targets, like ammunition depots, further from the front lines. This makes it harder to supply its combat units. Analysts say this is the game-changing part of HIMARS. Ukraine says its rockets have destroyed at least 30 logistics hubs and ammunition depots. Russia says it has destroyed at least 2 of the HIMARS trucks, a claim the US denies. But Ukraine's ability to use them effectively will also mean hiding these precious systems well. Keeping them supplied with ammunition is up to the West.
And we can talk now to military expert Justin Crump, who heads the risk analysis firm Sibylline in the UK. Welcome to DW, Justin. We just heard there in our report that HIMARS could be game changers. More are on their way. But are a dozen HIMARS really enough to give Ukraine a military advantage?
On their own, no. I mean, there are no silver bullets in warfare. But this has come closer to being a game changer than most of the things we've seen in the conflict. And so, of course, there's a natural appetite to have a lot more. But the reality with any piece of equipment is that you need to not only have the equipment, but you need to train people on it. You need to have the spares for it to keep it in operation. You need to have the ammunition supply sustained. You need to develop the tactics to use it effectively. And that's the reason that Ukraine's being trickled about 4 at a time. By the US, because that's about the rate they can actually absorb them effectively into their forces. But you look at what sort of 8 in action and maybe another 8 en route to the country have achieved so far, and you can see exactly why Ukraine would like a lot more immediately if they could. But bringing those into action is a bit more challenging. So it's going to be a slow and steady build-up of these weapon systems.
OK, now we're hearing claims and counterclaims. Kyiv says it's using the HIMARS to inflict real damage on Russian forces. Moscow claims its military is simply destroying them. What can you tell us about what's really going on the ground?
I mean, we have to look at the evidence we're seeing in amongst this. The most clear thing is the dramatic drop-off in the Russian artillery tempo along the front line in the Donbass and in the south. And we can extrapolate quite a lot from that based on the claims of ammunition depots destroyed by the missile systems, which again, we've got footage of as well. And when you add that up, it looks like the Russians have suffered a pretty large-scale logistical challenge as a result of the HIMARS systems striking pretty vulnerable ammo depots that the Russians had. They keep their logistics very close to their front line. A lot of the locations of depots were known from the fighting in Ukraine since 2015. And I think the Russians didn't quite believe what the system could do, or were very confident that their surface-to-air weapon systems could shoot it down. And we've also seen some changes in the state company that works on those surface-to-air missile systems. So all of that suggests the Russians thought they could counter this or ridiculed the threat, discovered it was actually a very high threat, and are now paying the consequences in terms of decreased command control, increased pressure on logistics, and having to reorientate. And indeed, the Russians themselves, some Russian commentators are saying this is now a war of 3 acts. Act 1 was the battles around Kyiv until the Russians withdrew. Act 2 is until the arrival of HIMARS. and Act 3 is post the arrival of HIMARS. So it's being seen as quite a defining event on the Russian side. So I think I'll give a lot more credence to the Ukrainian point of view at the moment.
Okay, so based on what you say, I mean, Russia actually named the HIMARS as part of its justification for its heightened offensive beyond the Donbass. Is Moscow really quite worried now?
I think there's a little bit of bluster around that. I mean, that was linked to the capabilities of the weapon to fire out to a much longer range using effectively a ballistic missile from the platform. That's not been supplied to Ukraine, but obviously that's something that would have brought Russian cities into clear weapons range of Ukraine that Russia is probably worried about on some level. And I think there seems to be a degree of agreement with the US that these systems won't be used to fire into Russian territory. Now, how long that will hold, we'll see. But that's certainly an area where people are worried about escalation between Russia and Western powers. That's still quite sensitive. Now, supplying these systems would have been very sensitive 5 months ago, back in February, but it's something we're now doing. So you can't see that this dial won't continue to shift over time towards giving the Ukrainians even more effective systems. But certainly for Russia, it's caused a headache on the battlefield, strategically to an extent, but not as much. But it's that battlefield impact that's been most marked. And Russia will adapt. They'll hunt down these weapon systems with more UAVs. They'll disperse their forces. But all of that slows down their offensive and it buys Ukraine time. And time is what Ukraine needs in order to counter the Russians and maybe even strike back.